welcome to Flip the Script Silver Bullet Central, Episode 1, The Push-Pull Method and How to Use It to Write Irresistible Emails. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we dive in, if you could do me one small favor, be sure to go to flipthescript.co so you can make sure and download the deck to follow along at each step of the session. Other than that, let's jump in. But first, let's start off with a little bit of an agenda. As far as an agenda for today's session, I wanted to break it down into 6 different pieces. Number 1, I, of course, typical Becc Holland, wanted to add a little bit of structure. In terms of the kind of sequences you'll be running, and then a little bit of build-up going into the first email. Section 2 will cover the first email. Section 3, the second email, which is follow-up email number 1, and so on and so forth through 4, 5, and 6, which are email 3, 4, and 5, follow-up 2, 3, and 4. Got it? Let's go! Section 1 is a little bit of structure. So in terms of the structure of the sequences that you're going to be running, I have 2 different buckets of sequences. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. If you want to know more about this, then you can go into the How to Build a Sequence with Personalization session. But there are 2 basic buckets of scenarios or sequences that I'm building within my playbook for any team that I have. This is a comprehensive list of all of the sequences that I'm running. So basically on the left, you're going to have, for bucket number 1, all of the scenarios or sequences that you would build where you're basically mentioning the premise of the sequence to the prospect. And then bucket number 2 is going to be a bucket filled with all the different sequences that you can build where you wouldn't mention the scenario to the prospect. So great example of why you wouldn't mention one. For instance, you'll have over here number 2, which is firmographic trigger off of Crunchbase for companies who have just raised funding. So I've seen a lot of reps reach out and say like, hi, Scott. Reason for my outreach is I noticed that you guys over at Outreach just raised $50 million from Salesforce Ventures. Do you want to buy my stuff? Because I sell stuff for money and you just raised some money. And it just comes off a little bit disingenuous to your prospects. So basically, all of these scenarios over on in bucket 2 you wouldn't mention, whereas bucket 1 you would. But bucket 1 is primarily filled with what I would call postbound premises and postbound sequences. So what is postbound really quickly? Inbound is going to be true demo request and chat box through either Drift or Intercom. Outbound is going to be a cold, outbound scenario for anyone who has never heard of you. And postbound is going to be all of the premises in between. So a great example of that is content downloads, event attendees, webinar registrants, etc. But basically all the leads from marketing that aren't a true inbound, like a demo request and a hand raiser, but they still know who your company is. So they have, spiked buyer intent and they know exactly who you are. So these are all the different sequences that I am building into my playbook whenever I have a team. And you can read through some of them, some that are interesting, high value MQL or demoed in the past, or, common VCs with me, as a company, and then common VCs with my customers. Maybe you have a customer who has common VCs with someone you're trying to prospect into. But this is an exhaustive deck, and I have a sequence built for each one of them that looks the same in terms of structure, the same in terms of touch points, the same in terms of how many calls and emails that they have. Another session for another time, another topic for another time. But they all, have a little bit different messaging based on the personalized premise to the prospect that I'm talking to. And then, of course, the postbound mention of whatever action they took from marketing that helped them get to know your company. In terms of the actual sequence, so I just gave you a little bit of an infrastructure, but essentially every sequence that I have with any team that I'm running looks, again, the same in terms of structure and touch points and number of emails, etc. So every single sequence that I have is going to be 16 steps over 21 business days. And I follow the theory of, actually, MJ Hoffman, the author of Why You Now, talked a lot about his research on when you should reach out to people and how aggressive you should be in terms of the sequences. And his theory was that you should be lighter in the front end and more aggressive in the back end of the sequence, whereas reps are normally flipped. Typically, sales reps will be super aggressive in terms of when they email people and how often they email people and how often they call people in the beginning of a sequence. And then they peter off near the end, teaching your prospect that you're a little overbearing in the beginning off first impression, and that if they just wait long enough, that you'll go away. So he suggested that you flip it, and I've seen a lot of success with that. Of basically, in the beginning of your sequence, that you'll notice over here in the beginning of your sequence that you want to be a little bit lighter. You want to get to know them and be heavily personalized in all the things that you're doing. And near the end of your sequence, you basically want to speed up the amount of outreach. So I want to break down this structure a little bit. There are 5 different pods of outreach that I'm doing within every sequence. So the first step of every sequence here is going to be that I will have my reps go to LinkedIn and research the prospect finitely and tease out 3 personalized premises that they're going to use to fuel the rest of the sequence. There are 3 personalized emails in the sequence. It's going to be cold email number 1 on day 1, cold email number 3 on day 13, and then cold email number 4 on day 18. So basically, day 18, day 13, and day 1, and it's cold emails 1, 3, and 4 that have personalized premises. But there are 5 emails in every sequence, 10 cold calls in every sequence, and the 5 pods go like this. Your first pod is near the beginning, and it's going to be a cold email. You're going to do your LinkedIn research, and you're going to have a cold email on day 1, and then you're going to have a cold call on that exact same day and a cold call the next day and leave a voicemail. So that's your first pod of outreach, essentially, is you're basically going to email them the first day, with the personalized premise. You're going to cold call them that day and then cold call them the next day. The second pod, there's going to be a 6-day delta, if you'll notice, between pod 1 and pod 2. So pod 1 ends on day 2, and then pod 2 starts on day 8. So basically there's a 6-day delta, whereas day 8, you have a cold email, and we're going to go into the text of these emails a little bit, in just a little bit. But on day 8, you're going to do cold call or cold email number 2, and a cold call on that exact same day, and a cold call on the following day. So that's pod 2 is day 8, 8, 9. Then you're going to launch into pod 3, which is basically day 13 for cold email, and then day 13 for cold call, and day 14 for cold call. So the third pod starts on day 13. So there's a 5-day delta as opposed to a 6. And basically you're going to do a cold email, cold call, cold call. So each one of these case scenarios, you're going to do cold email, cold call, and typically you're going to leave a voicemail within the second cold call. So again, pod 3 is going to be 13, and 14, and it's going to be cold email, cold call. Then you're going to get a little bit faster, and the 4th pod starts on day 18, where you're going to go 18, 18, 19. Again, cold email, cold call. We'll go into the script a little bit later. And then your last pod is going to be start on day 19 with cold call, cold email. So basically, you'll see here near the end that you're speeding up pretty dramatically when it comes to the amount of steps that you're doing and how many you're deploying on your prospect altogether, because essentially you're going to break up with them on day 21. But you want to be lighter in the beginning, get to know them, do some LinkedIn research, pull 3 personalized premises, and start to be cool. And the beginning of your sequence when they're getting to know you, so they get to know you as the person who knows who they are, who's personalizing to them, which most reps aren't. And you're going to be kind of lighter in your outreach in the beginning. And near the end of the sequence, you're basically going to speed up to where in here in the meat, you're going to go 18, 18, 19, 20, 21, 21, to where they finally get to the point where they're like, if I don't answer this person, they're not going to go away. So I've heard a lot of reps say like, well, is this too aggressive? What if I overwhelm my prospect? Again, this is just my experience, and I've done it with 3 teams now. But with all 4 teams, with all 4 teams, essentially, when we were personalized, people weren't mad, even if we were aggressive in the amount of outreach that we were doing, if we were personalized. Now, if you don't know who the person is, and you haven't done your research, and you don't know their business, that's where I've seen prospects get really, really mad. So general rule of thumb, if you have done some research on someone, and basically when they pick up the phone, you're able to, state 3 different facts about them, and you really know about their background and their company, they typically won't get mad at you, even if you are doing quite a bit of outreach. So that's the structure of the sequence. So again, just a little bit of review. Every sequence that I've listed in here, whether it's in bucket 1 or bucket 2, all 14 of them, They all have the exact same structure. It's just the difference between content download sequence, for instance, and webinar registrants is that at the beginning of that sequence, it will mention, hi, Scott, I noticed that you attended the follow-up email session, but more importantly, and then they transition into personalization. But every single one of the steps for the shell sequence, quote unquote, that incorporates personalization is the exact same for every single sequence. So let's get into the first email. The first email, and I go into this quite a bit in the cold email session if you want to check that out more. But the first email, essentially, you're going to do 4 lines. The first line is going to be the longest line where you're going to pick out a premise about the person in specific. So you're going to say, hi, Scott, the reason for my outreach is I saw that you wrote this article on scaling teams effectively. One line that stood out to me was it all comes down to having great conversations. The second line is going to be your value prop, but hooked back into the personalization. You want to be careful not to personalize and then it has nothing to do with your second line. So your value prop line is where you're breaking down for them why that piece of personalized information actually ties into something that you can do. I'm going to go into that a little bit later in season 2 on how to hook personalization to relevance, but that's essentially the gist of this line, where I'll give you an infrastructure. And this is the medium length line, where your whole goal is to take the personalized premise, that you did in line 1 and relate it down to line 2 about what you do as a company. The third line is going to be your CTA, or what we'd affectionately call a call to action, which should be your shortest line, where you're asking for one time to unpack the above agenda in the email, for someone that's like them that's in their role. So what this can look like, I would always suggest striking up some kind of barter of if you give me the shot, if you give me an opportunity to meet you on Wednesday at 2 and unpack a little bit of how VPs of sales, leverage outreach to drive more conversion, I promise that we can part ways as friends if you're not impressed. Or I promise that I won't hammer you with follow-up emails in your inbox if you don't find any value. So you basically want to communicate to your prospect that if they give you that chance in that 30 minutes, you want to give them the recognition and self-awareness that most people would jam their inbox with all this follow-up post-meeting. It's one of prospects' biggest fears, and that you will not be that rep if they give you the respect and courtesy of, giving you 30 minutes and a shot to pitch your product. And then the fourth line of the first email is going to be the push-pull technique. So I go a little bit deeper in cold emails, but essentially a push-pull technique is a reprieve in the last line of your email where you're basically communicating to your buyer that either way, regardless of, whether they buy your product or not, or whether they give you the time, that basically, either way, I'm such a big fan of your team, be genuine. But either way, I'm such a big fan of your team, excited to see what you do in 2021. And, hope you're staying safe and sane with everything going on in the world. So this is a good place to communicate to your buyer that even if there's nothing in it for you in the positive stance, that you really, really like their work. So what that sounds like from the beginning is, hi, Scott, reason for my outreach is I saw that you wrote this article on scaling teams effectively. One thing that stood out to me was when you, one line that stood out to me was when you said, it all comes down to great conversations. What if you can ensure your reps over at Outreach were having great conversations with your prospects, really hitting home with them in terms of what matters to them in their day, and booking more meetings as a result? If you give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack how VPs of sales leverage, Chorus to understand and break down their calls and drive a little bit more conversion, I promise we can part ways as friends if you're not impressed. Either way, such a big fan of your team. Keep the good articles coming, and I hope you're staying safe and sane with everything going on in the world. So that's a great example for email 1. So now let's talk about the follow-up emails. So this is the example. This is the shot within Outreach. And again, you can look in the deck below. I hope that you've downloaded it for this. If not, then I'd pause the session here and go ahead and download it. But here's a little bit of the text that I was using in terms of I'm giving my reps quite a bit of structure. If you see within this example, I'm not just building an email and then leaving it blank. I'm essentially saying, if you notice here, I'll say reason for my outreach is I saw and leave it blank. One line that stood out to me is blank. And I even put in a little dynamic tag here with outreach that blocks me from sending this message unless this is filled in. So I wanted to be sure that all my reps were personalizing and that they didn't miss this. I have had reps before in the past, before I was using outreach, basically send out an email that said, reason for my outreach is I saw, and then it just went ... and then signed their name. Actually, the prospect booked a meeting, but do not try that. So there's quite a bit of structure in this email, but it's still, you'll see that it gives quite a bit of room for personalization and creativity within the email. So it gives them some structure, speeds them up, but gives them some room to breathe. So now let's talk about the second email. So you've had email 1 that's personalized. You picked out the premise of the article. You really drilled it home in the value prop and stuck the landing in the CTA. So what does the second email look like? And what does emails 3 through 5 look like? The second email, which is follow-up email number 1, I'm going to lean on what outreach would call the Agoji sequence. What's an Agoji sequence? An Agoji sequence is basically when you respond to the first email literally with the words, any thoughts. Sounds crazy, sounds like a nuts idea. And I was crazy enough to try it. I said, okay, if you have the research there, then I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. And it actually is a really good reminder for your prospects. So this is actually really can be an automated email that requires no personalization other than I always suggest checking a couple of grammar things like, is the name right, just because that's how I'm built. But basically the second email is just an Agoji email. It's a reply email to the first email. You say any thoughts, and then I couldn't stomach leaving it like that. So I basically on the last below that, I would put PS and I would add some kind of value. I'm the kind of person that whenever someone emails me, I crave that they add value to the conversation. And so I can't expect a prospector to add value to me if I'm not adding value to anyone I prospect into, right? So I would suggest attaching some piece of content to that Agoji email of like, instead of just saying any thoughts, you say any thoughts, all the best, Becc. And then it says, PS, given your role over at Okta, I thought you might enjoy this piece of content on cold calling effectively. But basically, regardless of what email you're sending, I always suggest that you add some piece of value. So what that looks like with an outreach is this. You can kind of see the majority of it, and then I'll switch sides. But it says, any thoughts, hi, first name, all the best. And then a great example, as I said, PS, given your team's growth here, I thought you might like this session that covers how to structure a cold call to draw more meetings. The slide deck for the session is also attached. So basically, this is really an automated email for your reps, that it gives them, they can basically send this out as is, and they don't have to make any kind of corrections onto the email. Okay, email 3. Email 3 is going to be follow-up email number 2. So you had your first email that was personalized. You had your second email that was the Agoji email that you replied to the first email and added some content with the words, any thoughts. Email 3 is going to be a mirror of email 1 in terms of structure, but a few different words so they don't realize they're on the script. So email 3 essentially is the same setup as email 1, where you have a personalized premise in the first line. And again, this needs to be your second personalized premise. So don't reuse the first one. I would go for a second one here of like, hey, Scott, reason for my outreach, and just reach out cold. Don't make any reference to emails 1 or 2. Meaning you don't want to remind someone if it has no reason, purpose, or strategy behind it. You don't want to remind someone that they broke up with you, right? You don't want to remind them that you didn't add value enough to get the first meeting. So you want to come in cold, pick up another personalized premise, and basically write the email based on that. So again, you have personalized premise. Then you're going to have your body, which is your second line, medium length, that you map back to the personalized premise. You'll have a CTA where you request one time to impact the agenda, and then you do the push-pull. If you struggle with this, just on a side note, I think a lot of people struggle with the idea that they're bugging people. So I flipped kind of the table on my reps one day, and they said, well, I just called this person, excuse me, and they didn't pick up. And I said, okay, let's call him Dennis. I said, okay, Dennis, let me ask you a question. Have you been cold called in the last 48 hours? And he said, yeah, I saw a number that I didn't know. I said, did you pick up? He said, no. I said, did they leave a voicemail? He said, no. I said, do you have any idea who that person was or what they want? He goes, I'm like, Same with your prospects, right? So their user journey is quite a bit different than what your biggest fear is. So again, I would always be personalized, but if you struggle with that, I would think through the amount of cold calls that you've turned down and, not taken the call and not thought anything about it. So again, it's the same in terms of structure, personalized premise in line 1, body that's hooked to the personalized premise. You're going to have a CTA to request one time to unpack, and then the push-pull, but in a little different words. So here you can see the text, and again, you have the deck in front of you, so you can see a little bit more. But very, very similar structure. But instead of saying what if in line 2, I said imagine you could. And then in line 4, for instance, in the push-pull, instead of saying either way, I said in any case. So you always want to make sure that your wording is changing up, but the technique is the same. So anyone who's any kind of high, any kind of asset to an organization or any kind of figure skater or any kind of musician, it's all within this set of rules. It's all within, whatever, the 4-bar blues, but each song sounds a little bit different, right? So you want to make sure that you're staying within structure, but you're also having a little creativity and changing up the words just enough to where they realize that they're not being, on some kind of repeatable structure that you have. So again, email 1's personalized. Email 2 is the reply email to email 1. That's the Agoji email that you add content. Email 3 is personalized again without any reference. Email 4. Now we're getting meaty. Email 4 is you're going to respond to email 3. And you are going to fall on your sword, so to speak, but really take accountability for why your prospect is not responding. Accountability is one of the most attractive characteristics, at least from my perspective, that you can have in life in general, but certainly in prospecting. And a characteristic that I don't see enough of, to be honest, in myself and in others around me. When someone reaches out to me and says, I'm sorry if you feel that way, or I'm sorry if you feel that I X, Y, and Z. It never feels like a real I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I did this thing, and I'm sorry if I feel this thing, or if you feel this way, are two very, very different statements. One has accountability, one doesn't at all. And when you think about how you're interacting with prospects, all you really have is the messaging in front of you, right? So I know it feels like we're being a little bit nitpicky probably here, or I'm drilling in a little bit here, but how you talk to your prospects matters. Words matter with your prospects and in general. So when you're taking accountability and instead of saying like, hey, I emailed you 5 times and you haven't responded, in email 4, you want to reply to email 3 and say, hey, I was reading an article the other day about how to be, relevant to your buyer or your prospects in terms of buyer persona, and I was convicted about the email that I sent to you, right? So you want to lead with, the reason you're not responding is me, which is the truth in most cases, is that we haven't been relevant enough, right? In the second line, you want to take ownership and you want to ask for a second request or permission to pitch them again. So you want to say, I should have, something like, you get the technique more than the wording, but the wording is, that I use typically is, I should have respected your time and given your permission. I'd like another shot to earn a slot on your calendar. Something like that, where you say like, I should have done better. And I'd like one more shot if it's okay with you. The third line, you want to go into your third personalized premise. So email 1, you are personalized. Email 3, you are personalized. And email 4, in the second half, you are personalized. So it'd read, again from the top, hi Scott. Reason for my outreach is I was reading an article the other day about being relevant to your buyer in terms of persona, and I was convicted about the message I sent to you. I should have respected your time a little bit more and given your permission. I'd like another shot to earn a slot on your calendar. I saw that you liked Josh Braun's post the other day about selling based off of impact questions or illuminating questions over the features that your product offers. Go into the body. What if you can ensure all of your reps over at Okta were asking great questions to your prospects, driving more pipeline in the meantime, and closing more closed-won deals as a result? Go into the CTA, same kind of structure as the personalization, emails in 1 and 3. If you give me a shot, Wednesday at 3 to meet you and unpack that idea that I have to drive more pipeline, I promise you won't hear from me again, if you don't see the fit. So basically, this is the example email, but you get the gist here. I basically am putting in this kind of script as something that the reps don't have to mess with. Like, they just see it in there and they can make a couple tweaks if they want to based on style. I'm never opposed to that, but they get the basic infrastructure of they're being accountable and they're asking for another shot. And then I basically put in a line here of like, here's where your custom pitch goes. And I put, again, the dynamic tag within outreach so that they can't send this email as is. Physically, they can't send it until they put something in here. And I remind them of the flavors that I want and the flavors that I don't want by putting the phrase 7 pillars and 7 deadly sins so that they know what to think about when they're writing the email. So that's email 1 through 4. But what about breakup? Breaking up is hard to do, right? Especially when it's with someone who has never talked to you. In the breakup email, I want to go back a slide. Breakup email, the point of a breakup email is to get your prospect to respond. It's not to associate blame. It's not to let them know that you're exiting the door. It's not to, pin it on them that they haven't responded. It's not to tell them that you need to update your CRM with more information if they would just respond. All of that is great in theory, but it makes them feel like the bad guy. So I've seen a number of breakup emails. One, for instance, is, I've tried to email you 7 times. Here's a list of things that could be going on with you. Either number 1, you're not interested. 2, you are off on an island somewhere. 3, you don't value data. 4, you just want me to go away. Could you just give me the respect of responding so I can update my CRM? The joy of selling and the pain of selling is that our prospects are really smart. They know exactly what we're saying in the subtext of this text. So whenever you're saying that, everyone, especially if they're in sales or have had any experience with it, they know that most of our data, I've never seen a company's data that was 100% clean. That they said every single person in my CRM, is the actual right person, still at the company, the correct email, the correct, phone number, and has the entire user journey based on multi-touch attribution for every single touch point that they've had with my company. Your prospect knows that, and they know that it would be called a yes trap if they were to respond to you. A yes trap is coined by Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference, an FBI negotiator. And he basically said that whenever you ask someone, hey, can I ask you a question? And you have like lotions in your hand at the kiosk at the mall, that your prospect says no because they know that in saying yes to you asking a question, they just wasted 15 minutes of their time and potentially $150 to buy lotion that they don't need. They know that it's just a trick to get to you to talk to them so that they can sell to you. So within a breakup email, you want to do it, but you want to do it in a very accountable manner and a very value-adding way almost, and just giving a little context and walking out the door. So the first line of the breakup email is I would take accountability and follow my sword, so to speak, and say, hi, Scott, reason for my outreach is I wanted to check in one last time and make sure that I haven't overstepped my bounds. You get the idea. You can use it any kind of words that you want. I just want to check in one last time and make sure I haven't messed something up, make sure that I haven't hosed the relationship here, but you're essentially communicating to your prospect that you just want to, poke your head and make sure that you didn't screw anything up here. Given your second line, you want to essentially put a body, but with research. Given your original article that you wrote, and I'd put in one of the personalized premises that you used within the first, 3 personalized emails, but given the article that you wrote, I originally thought it made sense to reach out. Then you want to walk out the door. Maybe it's just me, but I'm getting the feeling that now is just not the best time to connect. That's what a lot of your prospects are thinking. And whenever you call out what's in the room and what they're thinking, it helps build rapport with them because they think that you understand them, number 1. And number 2, you're not going to push like every sleazy other sales rep that they've met. So maybe it's just me, but I'm getting the feeling that now is just not the best time to connect. And then be okay with it. Did I get that right? If not, no worries. Perhaps we can connect in the future. So you want to push-pull near the end by saying, even if that's correct, it's not a problem. Maybe we can connect down the line, and then you want to sign it. So this is one of the highest response templates I have ever experienced in my career. Typically, conversion rates can fluctuate for cold outbound for template response, but I've seen them go anywhere from 0.02 response rates. I think the highest that I've seen as a template was hovered around 4 to 5% response rates to a cold template. This one for me has boasted anywhere from 15 to 19%. It depends on the buyer persona and the company that I was selling to. But it essentially gets your prospects to understand that basically you're walking out the door, that you're not blaming it on them, that you're not mad. You're giving a little context and making sure that you didn't screw up. And then the really fun kicker is if you look near the end, I always be adding value, right? So I say like, hey, P.S. I thought you might like the session below. So you're going to have the character. Not only are you going to tell them that you're getting the feeling it's just not the time to connect, you wanted to make sure you didn't screw up here, given your thing, why you thought it would make time to connect. And then it's not a problem that it's not a good time for them to connect. You're not only going to have that good a character, you're going to give them some piece of value even when you're breaking up with them. Right? So search after something. I always suggest third-party content because prospects tend to not trust your content if it's coming from you, especially if it's proving how awesome your tool is. Research their buyer persona, get to know them in the role and something that would really make their day better, and then attach a piece of content, about that thing, and you'd be surprised to see the conversion rates on it. I think one of the most best performing pieces of content that I've done recently is I had this entire pandemic sequence, right? Our buyer has changed. COVID changed a lot of the world. And I wanted to reinvent our buyer persona pitch according to people's new normal and the selling that they're doing. And I had 4 pieces of content in that entire sequence. One piece of content was literally just, I don't know if you like to work out at home, but here's a sheet on the top 10 exercises that you can do in your living room with no cost or additional equipment. That got a 65% click rate, even when our response rate was nowhere near that, right? So you want to add value to people's day, regardless of whether that is advantageous for you and your platform, because then when they see you and they think of you, they think of the person that did stuff for them, even when there was nothing in it for me, and even when it wasn't necessarily my job, right? So that's it. In summary, I know that emails are a really, really tough game. I know that following up with our prospects is not always the most fun. We want them to just say yes right off the bat. But I think that we have a really fun opportunity to be really creative and say things to our prospects that even in email 2, 3, 4, and 5, they can be just as strong as email 1. And that is predicated on knowing your buyer and thinking a little bit outside of the box. So that's it. That's all of the content, all 36 slides of it for this one session. If you like the session, be sure to go to flipthescript.co and sign in so you can see all of the different sales topics that are just like this one. And if you have a couple of minutes to spare, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and be sure to give us a follow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.